The wagon creaked one final time before its left wheel gave out in the rutted mud just outside the dry-bone sign reading Broken Mesa. The wind pulled at the loose plank like it wanted to leave too. It was near winter's edge, the kind of gray day that didn't bother to snow just, hung heavy and hollow in the sky like a held breath. Eloise Rayner stepped down slow, her boots touching the earth like it might reject her. A woman in a wool cloak patched with someone else's stitching, ash-touched hair tied in a low knot, and underneath it all what used to be a wedding dress, now dulled to cream and grit. One gloved hand gripped the reins of a limping mule. The other clutched a bundle of dried roots bound in braided twine. The main road of Broken Mesa wasn't much more than a spine of dirt flanked by sagging buildings and sharper stairs. Windows watched her. The doors didn't open. She passed the chapel first. Whitewashed, cross-bent sideways, steps uneven. She climbed them anyway, knocked twice. When the preacher opened, she asked, voice soft but firm, "You got room for a woman?" With no place, he looked behind her, saw. No child, no man. Just the mule, the roots, the dirt. "We have the Lord's house. And the Lord's house offers prayer, but not a bed. The Lord will guide you," he said, and closed the door with the hush of finality. She left without speaking, back into the street's cold silence. The general store was louder. For men inside, thick with tobacco breath and trail dust, looked up when she entered. She asked if there was land, small, fallow, unwanted, something a woman could make her own. They looked at each other. One man spit into a dented can and said, "You mean you want to buy land? With what?" Another laughed. "Grief? She ain't got coin. She's got stories and soil on her hem. She's blown seed," the last said, and that was the worst because he didn't even laugh when he said it. Just said it quiet, like a farmer who'd seen too much wind, left before the heat in her cheeks could be mistaken for weakness. Only one person saw her leave and didn't turn away. Across the street, half-shadowed in the saloon's overhang, stood a man with his back against the post and a rifle leaning beside him like it had weight beyond wood and iron. His face was hard-cut and unreadable, beard flecked with gray, hat brim hiding his eyes. But he didn't mock. He didn't blink. She didn't speak to him, didn't nod. But she felt him watching her even as she crossed the town's edge again. South of town, the river bent into a crooked elbow, sheltered by scrub willow and cottonwood roots clawing the bank. She tethered the mule, gathered brush, tried to strike flint. Her hands shook. The wind tugged at her shawl like a thief, stealing what little warmth she'd hidden beneath layers of memory. Twice the fire sparked, and twice it died, by nightfall. Her fingers were raw. The roots lay in a pile untouched. The stars above were colder than frost. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Farther still, laughter from the town rode the wind, thin and cruel. She wrapped herself in the cloak and lay beside the fire pit. Not sleeping, not yet, just remembering. The ground was hard, but not as hard as the hearts behind the doors. Some winters, she thought, didn't come from the sky. They came from men. Snow had fallen in the night, though the sky held no color of storm, just a pale weight pressing down on the world. Eloise blinked against the cold and realized her hair was speckled white knot from age, not from ash, but from flakes that had drifted down while she slept like feathers from some indifferent sky. The river beside her made no sound. Its surface had frozen just enough to dull its voice. The edges glimmered, crystalline and sharp. The fire she'd tried to build had long gone cold. A charred skeleton of brush curled in on itself. She sat up slowly, groaning at the stiffness, and her hips then wrapped the wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her breath made a ghost before her. Her fingers, red and stinging, reached for a pile of twigs already half frozen. Memory clung tighter than the cold. The baby's cries from last winter too weak, too short-lived. The fever that took her husband in the mountains before spring thaw. And the church elder who'd stood outside his door, arms folded, refusing to step inside. A woman alone. "Has no witness," he'd said. "We cannot confirm a death without the Lord's eyes." She buried her husband herself, stones piled over a shallow grave. She left the child with a whisper and a broken cradle. She couldn't carry farther. The image returned now, and again a wedding dress hung between two posts, wind tugging it like a flag of surrender. It had never been worn again. She didn't even know why she still kept it bundled beneath the cloak. She trudged back to Wardtown that morning, her boots soaked through by melted snow, her hem stained in clay. The chapel stood firm, cross now fully broken, leaning sideways like an old man bowing to wind. She knocked again. This time, no one opened. She stayed a moment longer, palm pressed to the cold door, then turned away. At the well, a pair of boys watched her fill a tin kettle. One whispered, the other just stared, wide-eyed, as if looking through her, not at her. A woman drawing laundry near the steps of the general store caught sight of Eloise and turned quickly, face hard with dismissal. The weight of the town pressed in, heavier than snowfall. Then behind her, a sudden noise, a rifle's click. She froze, hands still on the kettle. The silence was sharp. A pause. Then the rifle cracked, echoing against the storefronts. Eloise turned, in fear, her heart thudding. But the shot wasn't meant for her. Across the square, Silas Hart stood with his rifle braced against his shoulder, eyes fixed on something just beyond the buildings. A gaunt wolf had crept near the alley, ribs like bent nails under fur. It now limped away, yelping toward the trees. Silas lowered the rifle. She met his eyes from across the distance. He didn't nod, didn't speak. But he didn't look away either then. Without a word, he turned back toward the saloon, mounted his horse, and rode off. But not before she saw what had fallen beside the well. A piece of wood no bigger than her palm. A hand-carved horse, worn and smoothed in places. Its front leg cracked at the joint. She picked it up gently, ran a thumb across the splinter. That evening, when she returned to her riverside camp, the smell of smoke met her before she saw the glow. A fire already built, not blazing, but steady. Warm, no one in sight, but boot prints led to the tree line and west. Toward the hills, she didn't follow. She simply sat, added a few sticks, and let the fire catch. When the wind rose again, it didn't feel as sharp. The clouds rolled in like a warband low, dark and mean. The kind of storm that didn't wait politely at the edge of the horizon, but came all at once, screaming through the cottonwoods and bending the taller pines like they owed it something. Eloise had known weather. She'd lived through prairie fire and river thaw, but this storm felt different, like it was hunting. She pressed her shoulder to the lean-to, trying to reinforce it with one more limb, her hands numb, her sleeves soaked. Through before the first thunder even hit. The sky cracked sideways. A fork of lightning split a tree on the ridge, then hoofbeats, fast, heavy. A rider emerged, through the wet and dark. For a moment, she couldn't see who it was. Just the shape of a man and a wide horse and a lantern that swung like judgment. Silas Hart pulled the reins short. Rain slid from his hat brim like melted lead. "Barn's open," he said. That was all. His voice was low and rough, like gravel, soaked in whiskey. She stared, blinked. The fire had gone out hours ago. Her mule trembled behind her. He didn't wait for a reply, just turned. She followed. It was a long ride north. The trees thinned, the snow turned to hard rain, then back. To snow again? The time they reached his ranch, both were drenched to the bones. The place was silent, sparse. A long fence line wrapped around a wide plot of land. The house stood hunched on a hill, plain but upright. Off to the side, the barn loomed old, wide-doored, its roof patched in 3 places. Dismounted first. Tossed her the reins. "You'll want the barn." She caught the reins, nodded. "Thank you." He didn't answer, just walked up the porch, past a rocking chair that swayed, though the wind had stopped. She took the barn. Inside, it smelled of cedar, dust, and old hay. A loft above. Tools hung on the walls in neat rows. No animals, just space. She laid her bundle down, removed her cloak. built a fire in the rusted stove using the stacked logs that seemed left for her. That night, thunder cracked the sky so loud it startled her from sleep. She sat bolt upright, eyes darting to the shadows. She thought she heard her baby crying, but it was only wind threading through the slats. From the loft's small window, she saw a flicker of lantern light. Silas, walking the porch back and forth, the light in his hand moving like a heartbeat, steady, never pausing. He didn't come down to the barn. He just walked. The storm stayed until nearly dawn. When she stepped outside, the sky had cleared, but the ground was a mess of melted snow. In black mud, he was already outside. Axe raised, splitting wood into neat halves, like it was prayer. She watched him a moment. We didn't stop or look at her. Just asked without turning, "You cook?" "Yes, you'll eat then." That was all. She set to boiling water in the barn, used roots, bits of dried meat from her bag. When she brought the pot near the porch, he was gone. But the rocking chair was still moving. They didn't speak much that day, but the silence between them was no longer a wound. It was something else. Like a coat hung between two nails, still empty but waiting. The days passed without a calendar. The world turned in wood smoke and wind. Eloise woke before light, her breath fogging the barn air. She mended the sleeves of Silas's worn flannel shirts with thread she'd kept looped through an old bone. Needle. She gathered the eggs, swept the porch, kept the stove fed. She didn't ask. She just did. He never told her to leave. He never told her to stay. Each evening, she left a plate by the door of the house. Sometimes it was gone come morning, sometimes not. One afternoon he stepped outside with a fresh shirt, saw her kneeling by the chickens and said, "You don't need to sleep in the barn. The front room's got a bed." She paused, hand still on the coop door. I know. She didn't move, didn't explain. Pride or fear, she wasn't sure which still held her tighter. That night, she lit the lamp late and began sweeping the corners of the barn she hadn't touched since arriving. Dust clung to everything like time. In the back wall, half covered by an old tack cloth, she found a drawer, locked, but the wood was swollen with years. A little pressure, a twist of the knife she used for roots, and it gave. Inside were things no one had looked at in seasons. 2 long braids of hair, thick and dark, tied with red string. Faded cotton dresses, soft as memory, folded with care, and a photograph. The paper was curled and smoke-stained, but the image still held. A native woman stood beneath a cottonwood, a child in her arms. Both looked toward the camera, unsmiling. The woman's eyes were sharp, unafraid. Eloise closed the drawer gently. But the image stayed. The next morning, she watched Silas as he repaired the fence rail with one good hand and a quiet focus that dared no questions. "Was she yours?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. "My wife," he said. Nothing more. She waited, heart pressing against her ribs like it wanted to listen harder. "They didn't bury her," he added. After a pause so long, she thought he might not speak again. Not properly. Not in town. The wind shifted. Chickens clucked behind the coop like they sensed something unsettled. That evening she brought her plate inside. The hearth was empty. She set it down anyway, then walked back out into the dusk. Later, as the fire popped in the barn stove and shadows danced across the rafters, he came. He stood in the doorway, coat damp with melted snow, boots heavy with dirt. "They called her a curse," he said without prompting. His voice was lower than usual, strained like a rope. "Said the raids came because I married her. Said she marked this land." Eloise didn't interrupt. "They came for us after. The river killings. Didn't care, we lived quiet. Didn't care she birthed my son here." Took off his hat. Ran a hand through hair, gone silver at the temples. "They burned our barn. Shot the goats. I was gone hunting. Came back too late. The firelight moved over his face like water. I buried them on the hill behind the ridge, far from town, close. Enough to hear the birds." He didn't cry. But the silence afterward was the kind that had once held weeping. She nodded once. Her fingers moved, not knowing where to rest. Then she poured him tea and left the cup by the door. In the morning, she rose early again. But something was wrong. The rocking chair, the one that had always moved no matter the wind, was split down the center. Both rails cracked clean through, like it had been kicked or axed in rage. Silas was gone. His horse still stood tethered near the well, and the sky had the weight of a storm coming, low and cruel. Silas returned just as the sun slipped below the ridge, turning the snowdrifts to ash and gold. His coat hung crooked off one shoulder, torn at the seam. A bruise bloomed across his cheek like spilled wine. His knuckles were scraped raw, one hand trembling slightly as he dismounted. Eloise stood at the barn doors, breath clouding in the air. She didn't run to him, didn't ask. He looked at her with a face carved from stone, but his eyes, those were full of something that didn't have a name. "They said I brought ghosts back into town again," he muttered, brushing snow from his sleeves. "They meant you too." She didn't flinch. She simply turned and walked inside the barn. This time it was her who built the fire. Her who knelt before the stove and coaxed flame from damp pine. Her hands moved with a quiet resolve like prayer. He followed but didn't speak further. The room filled with warmth, slow and steady. The kettle steamed. He sat on the old crate by the wall, elbows on knees. She didn't ask about the bruises. He didn't explain them. Instead, she told him her baby's name. Ruth had hung there between them. He didn't nod, didn't speak. His hand curled into a fist so tight his nails left half-moons in his palm. Then, softly, barely above the crackle of fire, he said, "I lost a daughter, Eloise. Didn't move. She braided my hair once. Laughed when I wouldn't hold still." His voice cracked at the edge, raw as old rope. "She made me wear red string, said it meant strength. Never took it off." He opened his hand. In the center of that weathered palm lay a thread frayed, dull, barely red now, but still tied in a loop. She stared at it a long moment, her breath catching somewhere in her throat. Outside, snow began to fall again, silent and soft, brushing the barn roof like a lullaby. They sat there as the fire grew taller, casting long shadows across the beams above. Shapes moved, they're gentle, flickering like old spirits finally making their way home. They didn't touch, didn't need to, but neither moved away. The silence was no longer empty, it was full. When Eloise finally stood, the fire burning low behind her, she walked toward the house with slow, careful steps. The wind had died. The air smelled of pine smoke and something almost sweet. As she neared the porch, she noticed the front door of the house. It stood open, just slightly wide enough for someone to step through if they chose. Weeks passed, like leaves pulled slow through a stream quiet. Steady, but not without current. The snow softened. Ice broke. Cracks reappeared in the woods. And with the thaw came rumor. They said she'd bewitched the cowboy. Said he'd given her more than shelter. Said ghosts walk louder when a woman speaks too calmly. Then one day a rider came from town. Not a friend, not a neighbor. A deputy in a brown duster and black gloves. Eyes too sharp for peacemaking. He knocked once. Eloise answered the door. He around. The deputy asked, glancing over her shoulder. "He's not here," she said, "but I am." That amused him. He leaned back in his saddle, scoffing. "You? What claim do you think you have on this place?" Eloise said nothing. Just stepped inside, returned with a folded paper wrapped in twine. She handed it up to him. He unfolded it slowly. Once. Then again, a land deed, signed by Silas Hart in ink. Then again, at the bottom in blood. He said no one gave him land. She said quietly, "But someone gave him mercy once. Now it's his turn." The deputy didn't argue. He nodded once. It's not with respect, but with finality. Then he turned and rode back the way he came. After that, the town quieted. Children began waving when she passed the well. A few women lingered near her fence, asking about salves for fever root or ginger poultices for their men. No one at the church spoke to her, but no doors were slammed anymore. Silas didn't speak much of the deed. He just worked the field like always, And one morning, without words, he began hammering boards near the river bend. By month's end, there was a cabin, small, sturdy, facing east. A place where wind would whistle gentle, not cruel. She moved into it without ceremony, began planting rosemary and sage, painted the door a blue that didn't match anything else but the sky. One evening, as the last coals of dusk bled across the hills, she sat on the porch beside him. Smoke curled from the chimney, stew simmered inside. She wore her shawl, the one patched with her wedding dress, and braided her hair slowly. Her fingers wove the strands with red string, careful and deliberate. He watched her, said nothing. When she finished, she set the braid over her shoulder, like a flag laid down in peace. His hand reached out, rested over hers, worn and quiet. They didn't speak of the past, didn't speak of ghosts. The wind moved through the valley, gentle this time. The camera would drift back now if there were one, rising past the chimney smoke, past the rough-hewn porch, past the fields marked only by boot prints in ash. Snow began to fall again. But this time, it didn't bite. It blanketed.